Over that way is King's Cross Station. A lot of people busy, bustling around, focused on their goal or goals, acting in accordance with their free will, you would imagine. And yet some people suggest that we don't have any free will, that we're simply automatons. And much as we might not like that idea, the argument's quite strong. Let's have a canter over it. In the first instance, imagine you're driving and someone cuts you up in traffic and you get annoyed with that individual. And that can cause a surge of adrenaline, cortisol, and that may mean their next behaviour is ill-tempered in comparison with how we would normally behave. So that means that incident can cause us to do something that we wouldn't normally do. Maybe there's less of a choice or no choice because we're angry, annoyed, irritated. And then you may say, yeah, but hold on, that doesn't happen all the time, and I make those choices. Don't always get caught up in traffic. True. But then let's think about habits, conditioning. Does the name Pavlov ring a bell? And not only are we conditioned by various things, we have values that tend to impact what we do. Right? Value the idea of freedom of speech. Where does that come from? Probably our beliefs. Where do our beliefs come from? Peer group, family, upbringing. And what are the things that can go wrong? We can experience annoyance again, cascade of adrenaline, cortisol as this guy hammers in the background. I'm going to go and speak to him. No, hold on, I've got free will. So those beliefs can come from things in our childhood. It could be a traumatic event. It could also be that we're in a team, a sporting group who will always be there for each other. We believe that's important, so we value essentially helping others. Maybe that extends to society itself. And very often with the beliefs and values are stories. There are stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. There are stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves that other people have told us. And we tell ourselves stories about others. And again, we could argue that those are a form of belief. And then let's go further. In any given moment, homeostasis can be at work within our system, but it might not be. Maybe there's a medication which is impacting how we are functioning, thinking, maybe a lack of medication. And we know these days about neuroplasticity. And so as we go around and function within our environment, then maybe things impact us. Maybe epigenetics kicks in. Maybe how genes express certain proteins is impacted by what is happening around us. And then we can think about those things that happen in the moment within, let's say, our neurons. So depolarization, hyperpolarization, ion-gated channels, potassium, calcium, sodium. How much of that is happening automatically and is a result of our environment? And then we can go back even further. Some of us, we behave at least in part because of family traditions, cultural traditions. Things can go back hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years. The architecture of the human brain itself is different from, let's say, a lemur. And that means that things are defined within certain parameters. Again, you may think, well, that's stretching into the fantastical. But what I'm hoping to paint the picture of is that in some ways, that argument is sound to suggest that in any given moment, we may simply be the end result of a domino effect of many of these things that can cause us in that second or millisecond to say or do something, and that in actual fact it was a foregone conclusion. Now, I don't like that, and I don't believe that it's strictly true, but I think there's something in it. Here's a bit of a counter-argument, and it's not the only one, but to keep this relatively brief. What about premonition? There's a lot of cases where it would seem that we have an insight. Some experiments suggest that we have a sixth sense about danger. And what about dreams that can tell us things in advance? What about our ability to, it would seem, by using intuition, make a decision which doesn't seem to be based on any particular input from anything logical, at least? Again, one could argue this is like a sixth sense. What about those stories where people appear to have lived a totally different life? Young kids very often, and then they go and track down, based on the clues, the village, the individual who's no longer there, and these seem to substantiate these extraordinary claims of these people who say they've lived another life. Now, I don't necessarily think they lived another life. My suspicion is they're picking up on the consciousness of that individual, which is in the ether somewhere, because everything, again in my opinion, is conscious, the universe itself. And that being the case, then does that negate to a degree this idea of having no free will? I think it does to a degree. I think a lot of the time we probably don't have free will, or at least practice it, because we are doing things on autopilot. But then what about that ability to step back and observe ourselves in the moment, that some people call the observing self? What about meditation, when we can look at our thoughts going by? Who's doing the looking there? What is that part of us? And a lot of studies suggest that decision making is improved when we practice mindfulness meditation. And you could still say, well, yeah, but that's because you did the meditation, because you saw something that caused you to decide to go and do it. But I think that argument begins to peter out a little bit there. And here's something else to finish off that may, to misquote The Matrix, the movie, bake your noodle. So first up, let me suggest that, yes, I think that there probably are a lot of situations where, as I've said, we don't have free will, but I think we can practice it. And I think the more conscious we get about it, the more focused, the more we're likely to be able to do it. But even if we don't have free will, even if it doesn't exist, and everything is just this cascaded dominoes from thousands, tens of thousands of years ago, and we're simply the output in that moment of some kind of cascade, and endorphins, adrenaline, cortisol, the endocrine system, estrogen, testosterone, we're just the output. Even if that's the case, then I'm going to suggest to you that I think it's important to do the right thing, and I think that each and every one of us has a role to play in society, in the group, in the community, in business, in families, and that by doing the right thing we put an ethical and moral brick into the supportive structure of that community, of that culture. And it's important that we do it. And so in any given situation, choosing the right thing is extremely important, and I think that we can do it. But even if we can't do it, and we are these non-player characters, we are simply acting in that automatic way based on the inputs of other things, then I'm giving you an input right now. I mean, if you've watched this video this far, then my suggestion to you that it is important to do the right thing, and your agreement, if you do agree that it is important to do the right thing, could mean that in that moment, even though you might not be choosing, this has had an impact. This is part of the cascade. This video, this message. And by you doing the right thing out there, other people will see you do it, and even if they're not acting on free will, you've had an impact. You're part of that cascade. And if more and more of us do the right thing, morally and ethically, then we'll transform the society, the team, the business. Whether we're practicing free will or not,